Hey guys, today I'll show you a supernatural horror TV series named Crow's Blood. Spoilers ahead. Watch out and take care. The drama is set 20 years later after the first cloned sheep, Dolly, was born. With regenerative medical techniques evolutionally advancing over those years, regeneration of human organs, which was thought to be impossible, has become a reality. While regeneration offers a broad range of possibilities, human beings are now trying to play God to recreate life. The scene then shifts to 2006 when a research team led by a Japanese scientist opened a door of infinite potential through their outstanding research in the field of modified stem cells. Scientists are hopeful that in the future they will be able to generate any biological tissue through cellular recombination. In subsequent research, the research team successfully used the stem cells technology to create human skin and corneas. The modified stem cells technology does not rely on human fertilized eggs, freeing it from some ethical controversies to some extent. Yet unknown to many, humanity's mastery of the technology to arbitrarily create organs, even life forms, is akin to opening Pandora's box. Academia has always held differing views on this technology. One day in 2016, a debate on the ethical issues surrounding regenerative life science took place in Tokyo. Professor Sato, who opposed the use of stem cells technology for life regeneration, and his mentor, who was optimistic about the prospects of this technology, engaged in a heated debate. Professor Sato argued that humans should respect the natural laws of life. If one day all our organs could be freely replaced, our sense of self could be easily stripped away. However, a member of the audience couldn't sit still. This young man in a wheelchair had lost all his family in an accident and had both his legs amputated. If the stem cells technology had existed at that time, not only his legs, but even the life of his deceased wife could have been saved. The young man felt that Professor Sato was merely speaking from the perspective of a healthy person, without considering the needs of people suffering from illnesses. In extreme anger, he slit the throat of a spectator sitting next to him. It's a natural law that a person will die from excessive blood loss not long after their throat is slit. Faced with this situation, could Professor Sato still hold on to his beliefs? On this day, a peculiar exchange student arrived at a local high school. This girl was named Maki Togawa, and she came from America. She was unmistakably beautiful, yet her eyes were surrounded by chilling dark circles, and her gaze was exceedingly gloomy. When the homeroom teacher Ogasa prompted her to introduce herself, Maki just stared straight ahead, as if her soul had already departed her body. After Maki had taken her seat, Nojiri, who sat at the back, asked her if they'd met before. Maki slowly responded, stating that she didn't know anyone in Japan, but her eyes gradually shifted towards a classmate named Kaoru sitting next to her. Kaoru felt uncomfortable under her icy stare. Suddenly, a crow crashed into the window, leaving a horrifying splatter of blood on the glass. The students were terrified, while Maki alone unveiled an unnatural, eerie smile. During lunchtime, the girls discussed the strange new student. Their class was already in their senior year, a time when it is unusual for someone to transfer schools. Kind-hearted Kaoru defended Maki, saying everyone didn't know her well yet and should not jump to conclusions. As they all joked with each other, Maki appeared out of nowhere at the lunch table, sat down without a word, and expressed her desire to become friends with everyone. Maki, oblivious to the room's atmosphere, caused the mood at the table to drop instantly. Kaoru hurriedly asked her why she transferred schools, to which Maki simply replied she didn't know either. Mai, the class leader, was infuriated. Upon further questioning, it was revealed that Maki had moved due to her father's job transfer. However, when asked about her father's work, Maki's response left everyone silent. She said that her father was a man who wanted to become a god. What was even more terrifying was that during the meal, black blood dripped from Maki's running nose, and she obliviously picked up her rice and ate it. Everyone present yelled in disgust and watched from the sidelines. Only Kaoru took the initiative to accompany Maki to the infirmary to get checked. The school nurse used a newly replaced blood pressure monitor to check Maki. However, the machine malfunctioned and couldn't measure her blood pressure at all, so she suggested Maki go to the hospital for a full examination. Kaoru was concerned and asked Maki if she knew the way to the hospital. Maki replied that she had spent a long time in a hospital before and didn't want to go back. On the same day, she also realized that Kaoru was genuinely scared of her. Maki was a deeply pessimistic child, only speaking words full of despair. The school nurse allowed her to leave early, but Maki interpreted this as a chance to go wherever she wanted and invited Kaoru to accompany her. But Kaoru, being an exceptional student, had to leave this strange classmate behind and return to the classroom. The next day, during physical class, the girls discussed Maki's condition in the changing room. Kaoru, not daring to reveal the truth, told everyone that there was nothing serious. Mai speculated that Maki might have contracted an STD in America, but Kaoru thought that the American story was a lie. She felt that she had seen Maki somewhere on TV before. However, when she searched for Maki, no such person seemed to exist. Just then, Maki walked into the changing room and began undressing as if no one else was there. She then approached Mai, bare-chested, and asked her what she would do if Maki beat her in a race during physical class. In fact, Mai was the top student in the sports field. When the teacher blew the whistle, Maki, not even changing into her sneakers, surprisingly showed off her turtle speed in front of everyone. However, a moment later, Maki, who was lagging far behind, suddenly sprinted forward and quickly took first place. The sight of her running as if she had tripled her speed, like a video on fast forward, left everyone stunned. Out of curiosity, Nojiri thought of a way to investigate Maki's background. That evening, Nojiri reviewed the track records of Japanese high school students. Before she knew it, she fell into a dream where she was chasing a girl on a dark track. When the girl turned around, her face was covered in black blood, and she lunged at Nojiri like a zombie. When she woke up, Nojiri looked at the newspaper records on her computer and fell into deep thought. As expected, Maki Togawa was a pseudonym. Her real name was Maki Seto. The next day at noon, Nojiri called Maki to the rooftop for a private conversation. Like Kaoru, Nojiri was also an honor student on the surface, but she hid many secrets that she didn't want others to see. She had always hoped to find a partner with whom she could share secrets. She told Maki that she had found out her real name. At that moment, downstairs, two sisters named Chisa and Shinobu were applying screen protectors to their phones. Shinobu warned Chisa that if she didn't apply the protector correctly, her phone screen would be ruined if it fell. Just as she finished speaking, a figure fell from above, splattering them with blood. It was Nojiri. Strangely, although her body was twisted and broken from the fall, she was still smiling and saying that she thought she could fly like a bird. Shinobu didn't understand why she would say that, but while she screamed in horror, she took out her phone and recorded the gruesome scene. Quickly, Chisa and Shinobu uploaded the video to YouTube and named it "High School Girl's Failed Attempt to Fly." By noon that day, it had gone viral on the internet. Back in the classroom, the students discussed the unethical behavior of Chisa and Shinobu uploading the video. Although it was an inhumane act, it didn't seem like Nojiri was in serious condition. The girl, Hikari, mentioned that when Nojiri was being loaded into the ambulance, she was still waving to everyone. In the afternoon, the school held an emergency assembly to address the incident of Nojiri's fall. Maki told Kaoru that Nojiri jumped willingly because she wanted to fly in the sky. Kaoru, who hadn't yet connected the accident with Maki, corrected her, saying Nojiri said she had become a bird. Maki mysteriously smiled and said that Nojiri must have become a crow. A few days later, the hospital finally allowed visitation for the injured. The girls arranged to visit Nojiri in the hospital, but everyone was stunned the moment they saw her. Apart from the bruises on her skin, all her broken bones and skin had completely healed. She even felt in top physical condition. Additionally, there were roses that Maki had sent on Nojiri's bedside table. Strangely, Maki had come the day before when visitation was not yet allowed. Maki soon appeared and told everyone that Nojiri would be discharged the next morning. Their relationship had become very close at some unknown time. Although Maki's face was still gloomy and frightening, she became much more cheerful when talking to Nojiri. The always clumsy Nami even attempted to comfort Nojiri, saying she was super jealous that Nojiri got flowers and recovered from her injuries so quickly. Maki immediately scowled at Nami, asking if she also wanted to fly from the sky. On the way home, Kaoru felt that a man was following her, but fortunately, he was not a bad person. He was the reporter for a magazine called Mysteries and Reality. After seeing the uploaded video by the schoolers, the reporter approached Kaoru, who was from the same school, to investigate for more details. The reporter was probably the honest type, as he became nervous and dropped his magazine upon seeing the beautiful Kaoru. The reporter's magazine was not a mainstream publication. During the day, he worked in an arcade, and in exchange, his boss provided him with the second floor as an office for his magazine. The reporter analyzed the peculiarities of Nojiri's fall for Kaoru. In history, there have been cases of survival after falling from a height of 10,000 meters, but survival from any height was only possible because there was something to buffer the fall. The place where Nojiri fell was a hard stone table. Moreover, it's unlikely for someone to speak immediately after receiving a violent impact. When Kaoru saw Nojiri later that day, she felt as if she had become a different person, with an unprecedentedly happy smile on her face. After returning home, Kaoru flipped through the magazine. The magazine was filled with unreliable articles, such as a celebrity being a time traveler. Kaoru told her mother that she was helping the reporter with some tasks. Her mother immediately saw that her daughter was interested in the handsome editor in the magazine. At this time, Nojiri called, because after Maki left, she felt bored and decided to chat on the phone. Nojiri told her that Maki's father worked in the hospital. Kaoru immediately understood why Maki could visit the hospital ahead of time, and why she had seen Nojiri's mother arguing with a doctor in the hallway during the day, questioning why her daughter was being used for experiments. She hastily asked Nojiri what the name of her attending physician was. Nojiri told her that the doctor's family name was Seto. Kaoru searched for the name in the browser and immediately discovered the truth about Maki, that genius track and field girl named Maki Seto, and a shocking news story about her. A few months ago, a murder occurred at a symposium hosted by Professor Seto, which led to an audience's death. Fortunately, Professor Seto, a doctor, quickly treated the victim, saving his life. However, after thinking about the words of the previous wheelchair-bound young audience, Professor Seto couldn't calm down for a long time because his wife had also died early. At this time, his daughter called. Professor Seto remembered that he had promised to have dinner with his daughter that night. However, the cheerful and beautiful Maki Seto was hit by a speeding car, and then a truck ran over her body heavily, causing her to die from her injuries. Kaoru was shocked by the news and wondered who Maki was at school. A few days later, Nojiri finally returned to school life. However, she, who usually sat quietly in the corner reading, suddenly became good at track and field events, and her face was filled with an unnatural confidence. Unexpectedly, 2 streams of black blood slowly flowed from her nostrils. During the physical class, the former track and field champion Mai was panting from exhaustion. Nojiri and Maki were still maintaining an incredibly high synchronization rate, running wildly. Nojiri even claimed that she could run even more laps. But just as she stopped, Nojiri noticed the teacher she had been secretly dating was getting along well with another student. Seeing Nojiri deliberately bump into the teacher's shoulder, Maki showed a wicked and rebellious smile. After school, Nojiri was screaming hysterically like a chicken in the changing room, venting her anger. The teacher, upon hearing the chicken noise, came to check on Nojiri. However, Nojiri asked the teacher to tongue massage her. The teacher simply scolded her if she had lost her mind before leaving the smelly scene. That day, Nojiri asked Maki out, wanting to know the truth of her death and revival. But Maki had already investigated Nojiri's secret relationship with the teacher and inexplicably kissed her. Then, with the sprint speed, she pushed Nojiri down the building. What Nojiri didn't know was that after her fall, Maki called her father, Professor Seto, and told him that she had sent over the gift she had prepared for him, which was Nojiri falling from a high place. Kaoru handed the latest clues to the reporter, telling him that Maki had died and revived, and Maki's father was Nojiri's attending physician. Following the clues of Professor Seto, the two discovered the truth of Maki's return from America. It turned out that after Maki's car accident, she was sent to Minnesota in the United States by her father's medical plane. To figure out Professor Seto's purpose, the two decided to visit him in person. However, Professor Seto denied that Nojiri's recovery was a supernatural phenomenon, but what concerned the two more was the truth about Maki's revival. Under repeated questioning, the professor gave a mundane explanation. Indeed, Maki's heart had stopped that night, but she was later successfully resuscitated. However, unscrupulous media reported that Maki had passed away. To avoid harassment from journalists, he sent his daughter to the United States for rehabilitation treatment. He also revealed that Maki's mother died of cancer a few years ago, and because of the car accident, Maki had been constantly bullied. If Kaoru really cared about Maki, she should become her friend, not like the unscrupulous media chasing after shadows and hurting the father and daughter. Looking at this haggard old father, Kaoru couldn't help but start to question whether what she was doing was right. One day at noon, Kaoru was on the rooftop, investigating the spot where Nojiri fell. Out of the blue, Maki appeared, asking Kaoru why she was probing into her affairs. She assumed that Kaoru's investigation was due to interest in her. However, when Maki heard that Kaoru and the reporter were investigating Nojiri's case, she became offended. Kaoru quickly apologized, mentioning Maki's mother's early death and expressing her willingness to be friends. In front of this adorable girl, Maki seemed to want to lean in for a kiss, but noticing Shinobu and Chisa nearby, she changed her mind. Later, Shinobu and Chisa found Maki in the changing room. Upon overhearing that Maki's father was a doctor, the two girls falsely claimed to have depression. They demanded that she help them get antidepressants from her father. Maki immediately saw through their lie and gave them a contemptuous smile. The two girls immediately turned hostile, threatening her and calling Maki a monster. The word monster instantly ignited Maki's fury. She grabbed Chisa, kissed her, and then repeatedly slammed her head into a locker. Seeing the bloodied Chisa, Shinobu defended herself with scissors, accidentally scratching Maki's cheek. Maki quickly overpowered Shinobu, first delivering a deadly kiss, then repeatedly bashing her head, leaving the two girls completely subdued. When Maki left the locker room, she ran into Mai, who was late for school. Mai and her mother were dependent on each other. Despite appearing tough on the outside, Mai was actually a gentle and kind daughter, who frequently arrived late to school as she was caring for her mother who had cancer. With tear streaks on her face, Mai didn't mind the blood on Maki and was consumed with thoughts of her weak mother. When Mai arrived home after school, she found Maki waiting for her. It turned out that Maki had heard about Mai's mother being ill. She told Mai that her own mother had died of cancer. Moved by Maki's story, Mai allowed her to enter her home. Back at school, Kaoru found Nojiri, who had been left behind for extra lessons by the teacher because her studies had been neglected due to Maki's relentless track and field training. Kaoru wanted to ask her about her miraculous recovery from the fall, but Nojiri insisted that she couldn't remember anything from that day, and any attempt to recall caused severe headaches. Therefore, she couldn't remember being pushed off the building by Maki. She knew this wasn't normal. Seeing her friend's bloody running nose again, Kaoru had to abandon her inquiry and went to find the reporter instead. Kaoru urged the reporter to drop the investigation and give Maki a peaceful life, but hinted that if he wanted to chat about some chilling love stuff, he was welcome to find her anytime. The reporter, in his dullness, said Kaoru was still underage and dismissed her as immature. Annoyed, Kaoru turned to leave. Realizing his mistake, the reporter quickly tried to stop her. Several days later, the reporter discovered a new clue. It turns out that a few months ago, Professor Seto and his mentor held a scientific forum. Although Professor Seto was opposed to using regenerative life technology to resurrect the dead, his daughter met with a car accident that night. Coincidentally, his mentor was in Minnesota, the same place where Maki was recuperating. Everything seemed to connect suddenly, except that Nojiri had never gone to Minnesota for treatment. So how could she also resurrect? The reporter linked Nojiri and Maki's black nosebleeds to a terrifying possibility. Perhaps the ability to resurrect was contagious. As for the transmission method, based on the two cases so far, it seems that the virus can't be spread through the air for now. As the reporter fell into thought, Kaoru couldn't help but touch his handsome face and tentatively brought up kissing. But the oblivious the reporter thought she was talking about transmission methods and responded that kissing could likely transmit it, which led Kaoru to a disturbing association because that day on the rooftop, Maki seemed to have tried to kiss her. In school, Nojiri stood on the rooftop, looking at the self-portrait she had drawn in the hospital. To verify a terrifying guess, she leaped off the rooftop. Her body twisted and broke, but within half a minute, her broken limbs healed rapidly. At home, Mai prepared a drink for Maki, only to find Maki by her mother's bed, kissing her lips. Maki stood up and explained that she couldn't forget her mother's death, then left. The next day, Maki didn't attend school. While the classmates were bad-mouthing her as usual, only Mai changed her attitude, asking everyone to show more compassion to their sick classmate. The reason Maki didn't go to school was that her father had called her into the hospital for treatment. Ever since Nojiri fell from the building, her father had asked her to go to the hospital for routine checks after school every day. As the reporter and Kaoru had guessed, after the car accident that night, Professor Seto, who had lost his wife, did not want to lose his only daughter. So he made a decision against his beliefs. He sent his daughter to his mentor's lab and, as the first subject, successfully resurrected her. However, to Maki, her father's action of resurrecting her was too selfish. She would rather have been crushed under the wheels than live the life she now had, being treated by her father as a monster and experiment. Several days later, Mai found that her mother's cancer had miraculously recovered. Her mother was now glowing with health and tirelessly preparing a large table of food for her daughter. Mai was naturally delighted to see her mother in good spirit, but after she left, her mother accidentally cut off her finger. She showed a strange smile, threw her finger into the trash can as if it didn't belong to her, and a few seconds later the severed finger grew back instantly. In the hospital, Professor Seto's assistant noticed something odd. After Nojiri had been hospitalized, the professor had extracted biological samples from her and handed them to his assistant for testing. The research confirmed that Nojiri had indeed contracted Maki's immortality ability. The professor demanded that his assistant immediately dispose of all the research data and samples. The assistant had always admired the professor, but since Maki returned from the US, the professor had gradually become worn out. After Nojiri's hospitalization from her fall, the professor seemed even more distracted. At this moment, what worried Professor Seto was that he might have opened Pandora's box. Soon, the lab in Minnesota video called him. 6 months ago, the professor's mentor had performed the same experiment on lab mice as he had on Maki, leading to mutations. Even after 6 months, the mutation conditions had not diminished. The mentor smashed a mouse to a pulp with a hammer, yet within a few minutes, the mouse had regained vitality. Moreover, the mentor confirmed that this mutation could be transmitted through bodily fluids like a virus. All the infected mice were aggressive, and strangely, all infected test subjects were actively looking for new hosts. On the other hand, ignoring Professor Seto's instructions, the assistant was still extracting samples from Maki and keeping experimental records. When Professor Seto found out, he stopped his assistant's actions. The assistant feigned an apology, fed a blank piece of paper into the shredder, and quietly left with the experimental records. Afterward, Professor Seto confronted his daughter, asking what she had done to Nojiri. His daughter merely responded that she was helping Nojiri live a normal life. Realizing that his daughter was still lacking normal logic, he decided to monitor her in the lab until his mentor found a cure. Maki insisted that she was normal and accused her father of selfishly turning her into an immortal monster out of fear of being alone after losing his wife. She threatened to expose all her father's actions. Professor Seto countered Maki, saying that if exposed, she would become a research subject for the government. But Maki retorted that it was better than being a research subject for her own father. In the dead of night, a security guard was making his routine patrol around the school. For some unknown reason, a crow had made its way into the gymnasium. Sensing something amiss, he quickly turned on the lights, only to find Mr. Ogasa, who was the secret boyfriend of Nojiri, hanging from the stage. Due to another unexpected incident, the school decided to take a day off. By this time, Shinobu and Chisa, who had already mutated, were roaming the deserted campus with baseball bats, trying to find some medicine to suppress their violent tendencies. After failing to find any sedatives in the school infirmary, Shinobu began to unleash her frustration by smashing everything in sight. The flying debris cut Chisa's face, and in response, she grabbed a pair of scissors and stabbed Shinobu in the foot. However, neither of them seemed to feel any pain as they continued their violent struggle. Because the school was on break, Kaoru went to find the reporter at the editorial department. After discussing, they found that the death of Mr. Ogasa was also related to Maki and Nojiri. In order to get more clues, Kaoru asked the reporter to find an informant within the police department. Unfortunately, both the police and the school had already reached a conclusion on the case. Mr. Ogasa had previously been reported for having an inappropriate relationship with a female student. The school's statement was that Mr. Ogasa had taken his own life due to unbearable stress. Unbelievably, the police revealed that the one who reported Mr. Ogasa was Nojiri. That night, the reporter went to find Professor Seto, wanting to inquire about the death of Mr. Ogasa. He brought up the situation in the Minnesota lab, threatening the professor to hand over the information. However, Professor Seto used his connections in academia and the police force to intimidate the reporter, warning him that if he continued to interfere, he would call the police and have him put in prison. After the professor left, the assistant, who had overheard their conversation, appeared. He warned the reporter to be careful with Maki. Professor Seto used to be a person of strong beliefs, but ever since Maki's resurrection and subsequent loss of control, the professor had been unable to control his daughter. Instead, Maki was using her father's secrets to try to control him. The assistant hoped that the reporter could expose Maki's actions so that she would be monitored by the government. The assistant was currently collecting evidence and also hoped that the reporter could help monitor Maki's actions. Kaoru was the perfect candidate for this job. Since the reporter wanted to visit Nojiri as soon as possible, Kaoru took the task and went to Nojiri's villa that night. Nojiri's parents were working in China, and she spent most of the year alone at home. After Mr. Ogasa's death, she was in deep despair. When Kaoru arrived at the villa, she found the floor covered in blood and Nojiri lying in a bathtub. Just as she was about to call the police, Nojiri, who appeared to be dead, suddenly stood up. Talking to herself, she asked why she had been chosen and why she couldn't die even though she wanted to. Then her neck broke and her head slumped onto her shoulder. Nojiri was once again taken to the hospital. After Professor Sito was informed, he immediately took Nojiri away for observation. Outside the hospital, Kaoru informed the reporter about Nojiri's repeated suicide attempts. Thanks to the help of a reliable informant, the reporter was in high spirits and couldn't help but laugh. He asked Kaoru to monitor Maki's activities at school. The next day, the school arranged a new homeroom teacher for Kaoru's class. Due to the sudden incident, the substitute teacher had to be a pregnant woman who was close to her due date. Maki showed great interest in the teacher's unborn child and even presumptuously asked whether it was a boy or a girl. The teacher was displeased and did not directly answer her question. The classmates noticed that for the first time, Maki was showing such strong interest in something, yet the cheerful Maki from the morning had a different facade by noon. Everyone was gossiping on the rooftop about whether Nojiri's suicide was related to Mr. Ogasa's death. Kaoru tried to change the subject, but Maki appeared with a furious expression, telling everyone that Mr. Ogasa was just a scumbag who was obsessed with the bodies of female students, and that Nojiri was destroying her own body for such a man. Later, Maki appeared in the reporter's editorial department, wearing a stunning lace dress. She asked the reporter if he liked Kaoru. He sidestepped the question, saying that Kaoru was just a high school student. Maki moved closer, trying to seduce the reporter into having a smelly relationship with her, promising to keep it a secret. Then she leaned forward and kissed him. At this point, Professor Sato was hoping that his mentor could help find a cure for his daughter. However, the news from his mentor was despairing. Upon learning that Nojiri had repeatedly come back to life after failed death attempts, the mentor was surprisingly overjoyed, knowing that they had developed a self-healing ability like Wolverines. This would be a great page in the history of human medicine. Seeing his mentor's excited appearance, Professor Seto realized that he could only rely on himself to find the cure. After school, Mai returned home only to find it in a mess, as if someone had broken in. At this moment, her mother was curled up in the bedroom. When she turned around, Mai's mother had aged overnight. By far, it becomes clear to us that American scientists have resurrected Maki using the stem cell technology. However, these cells can cause mutations in the organism, not only making it highly aggressive, but also prompting it to seek new hosts. The mutation is transmitted through bodily fluids. Maki has always wanted to break free from her father's control and not be monitored as an experimental subject. So she kissed Nojiri, hoping her father would shift his attention to experimenting on Nojiri instead. But she overlooked the fact that her father genuinely loved his only daughter. The scene then shifts back to the night when Nojiri jumped off the rooftop. After her jump, she called her secret boyfriend, Mr. Ogasa, to meet her in the gym. It turns out, upon seeing her wounds heal instantaneously, Mr. Ogasa screamed in horror, calling her a monster. In her rage, Nojiri bit and killed him to meet Satan. This incident was dismissed as a suicide out of guilt, and Mr. Ogasa's body was sent to the morgue. However, the mortician found the strangulation marks on his neck had disappeared. The busy mortician injected Mr. Ogasa with a preservative, without noticing that he had opened his eyes. However, the preservative caused the newly resurrected Mr. Ogasa to stiffen quickly. But then the mortician realized he had misread the records. Mr. Ogasa's family had originally arranged for him to be cremated. Thus, Mr. Ogasa was sent the body to the crematorium and burnt to ashes while still alive. No matter how powerful the mutant virus is, it should not be able to resurrect him. Elsewhere, Mai's mother aged overnight. She wanted to tell her daughter to let it go and die, but a sudden impulse made her kiss her daughter, passing the virus to Mai in an instant. Mai still took her mother to the hospital. Both Professor Sato and his assistant confirmed that she had been infected with the mutation. However, a new branch of the mutation occurred, causing her to age rapidly. The assistant was worried about losing control of the situation and wanted to report it to his superiors immediately, but he was stopped by the professor. Now, Professor Seto's heart has been twisted, and he has lost faith in justice and decided to keep this incident a secret. In desperation, the assistant decided to take the data and go report the matter alone. Kaoru arrived at the editorial department and learned from the reporter that he narrowly escaped being tongue massaged by Maki. Filled with hormone jealousy, Kaoru blamed Maki for trying to kiss the reporter despite knowing they were friends. However, while she was jealous, she was also worried that the reporter may have been infected. To confirm this, she asked him to close his eyes and gave him an uppercut. This confirmed that the reporter had not been really touched by Maki's smelly saliva. Later, the assistant asked the reporter to arrange a meeting with the police informant to hand over key evidence. However, after waiting a long time, the assistant did not show up. Due to the hospital elevator being under repair, Professor Sito and his assistant had to take the stairs. During this, the assistant accidentally dropped his bag while helping the professor, revealing the research data he still had. He questioned why the assistant was still holding on to the data. In the ensuing struggle for the documents, the professor accidentally pushed the assistant down the stairs, causing him to be seriously injured and unconscious. The next day, 2 young girls found the school nurse. Chisa covered her mouth while Shinobu viciously stabbed her greasy thigh with scissors. They then fed the nurse the delicious dark blood that flowed out. In the changing room, the girls noticed that Mai and Maki had become very close. Mai, like Nojiri, had also recently taken up jogging at noon, saying that if she didn't run, her body would feel like it was being torn apart. At this point, the new homeroom teacher called out Maki, saying that her father wanted her to go to the hospital to discuss some matters. Upon arriving at the hospital, Maki discovered that it was the assistant who was lying in the bed. Her father wanted Maki to share her resurrection ability with the assistant, but this act of treating his daughter like a monster enraged Maki once again. During the argument, Professor Sato confessed his true feelings, expressing how he missed his gentle and optimistic daughter. And Maki, too, had not completely severed her love for her father. She had been trying hard to suppress her violent impulses, but in the end, father and daughter parted on bad terms. Maki told her father that she was no longer the obedient daughter from before. She would not be controlled by others, and she would decide who to share her immortal abilities with. However, after Maki left, the professor discovered that the finger he had accidentally cut during their argument was bleeding black blood. Clearly, he had been accidentally infected by Maki. After learning of the assistant's injuries, the reporter visited the hospital, only to find out that both the assistant and Nojiri had been isolated and monitored by Professor Seto. Now all their leads had been cut off. Disheartened, the reporter wanted to give up the investigation, but Kaoru continued to encourage him. She initially thought the reporter was just a loser when they first met, but she was moved by his pursuit of the truth. Suddenly, the reporter thought of the previously hanged teacher, Ogasa, who was Nojiri's secret boyfriend. Perhaps evidence of regenerative cells could be found in his grave. So, in the middle of the night, they snuck into the graveyard to excavate the grave, only to find the police had already arrived and secretly removed the remains. On their way back, they bumped into a police informant who reminded Kaoru that she had almost crossed the boundaries of law. Once back at the editorial department, she told the reporter that she was going to attend a summer camp and needed to prepare. Considering how deep they'd gotten into the investigation and their near brush with the law, they agreed it was best not to see each other anymore. At the school, the new homeroom teacher recommended to the principal to postpone the upcoming summer camp, but the principal believed that in the current state of unrest, the summer camp would serve as a great distraction. Leaving the office, the teacher suddenly suffered severe pain. Her water broke prematurely, and the baby was about to be born. The birth was successful, and when she woke up from the unconsciousness after delivery, Maki was in the room, holding the baby. Maki had been frequently visiting the teacher's home unbeknownst to her, and had become friends with the teacher's husband. So, he had asked her to help take care of the baby. The person who had the Japanese government remove the remains was Professor Sato. He reported that Ogasa might have been infected with a dangerous virus before his death and needed immediate testing. After verification, a lab in Minnesota discovered the presence of regenerative cells in Ogasa's ashes. Several case studies showed that the older the person, the slower the cells regenerate. But if there were regenerative cells, why did Ogasa still die? The professor believed that cremation could prevent the regeneration of the modified stem cells. After obtaining the body processing records of that night, Sato finally discovered the real cause of Ogasa's death, the large amount of a preservative that had been injected into his body. At this time, the assistant brought bad news that Nojiri's parents, unable to stand by after her 2 suicide attempts, had rushed back to Japan and forcibly took Nojiri out of the hospital. This infuriated Professor Sato, who yelled at and dismissed the assistant. 15 hours had passed since his accidental infection, and for the first time, the professor discovered that he shared his daughter's uncontrollable violent impulses. After multiple tests, Professor Seto made a dangerous decision. The days of summer camp had arrived. Unnoticed, the group of 4 formed a new small team. On the travel bus, Maki was constantly staring at Kaoru, even sneaking to sit behind her. Seeing the worried Kaoru, Maki said that Mai and Nojiri have both suffered misfortunes but remain optimistic, and then told her to live with a smile. Kaoru, displeased by her previous attempt to kiss the reporter, told her not to meddle in other people's private affairs. But Maki retorted that the reporter was investigating her and her father's private matters. Yet now, all threatening enemies had been assimilated. Maki decided to seize the opportunity of the summer camp to reveal all her secrets. The reporter, still not giving up, returned to the hospital hoping to visit Professor Seto. Despite being stopped by the security guard, he stole a lab coat and followed the crowd delivering parcels to Professor Seto, sneaking into the elevator and reaching the lab. Just as he entered the lab, Professor Seto surprisingly called and asked the reporter to do him a favor. Meanwhile, at the summer camp, the girls were enjoying brief moments of happiness. Soon they discovered there was no Wi-Fi or cell signal, and the nearest convenience store was an hour's drive away. Kaoru was surprised to find that she had been assigned to the same dormitory as Maki. After the girls finished tidying up, the first collective study session of the summer camp began. The principal asked the children to share their views on friendship. The friendship Kaoru spoke of was mutual support and trust, and absolutely no betrayal or snatching of someone else's boyfriend. Maki understood that Kaoru was accusing her and pointed out that the nature of human society is based on interests. Humans began to help each other in order to resist attacks from wild animals, and it is this relationship that is most reliable. In her opinion, friendships formed by emotions and hobbies are very fragile. Afterwards, Kaoru saw a delicate box on Maki's bed in the room. Just as she was about to open it, her classmate Hikari suddenly appeared and informed her of an emergency meeting. It turned out that a landslide had occurred near the camp. The road was blocked, and all landlines were unusable. As a result, the students were forbidden to go out. A sense of foreboding surged in Kaoru. They were now in a perfect setting for a crime. The reporter had returned to the lab once again after removing his lab coat. However, Professor Seto was already dead in his chair. He had used himself as a test subject, reactivating the formalin to suppress regenerating cells, a successful experiment. The looping video was his final request to the reporter, admitting his crimes. Professor Seto confessed that he had forsaken his beliefs in order to bring his beloved daughter back to life, committing unspeakable sins. He regretted his actions and had prepared a final weapon for the reporter. He entrusted the reporter with a voice recorder containing his last words to his daughter Maki, asking him to play it for her. At the camp, Kaoru and her friends were having dinner together. For some reason, Nami, who usually hung out with them, was absent. Kaoru searched everywhere and found that most of the dormitory doors were wide open. The girls' suitcases were open, but no one was inside the rooms. Finally, Kaoru found Nami in the dormitory. She was about to tell her about the strange events that had recently occurred, but it was too late. Nami had already been infected by Maki. Maki said she was holding an emergency meeting, and then Nami left the dormitory. Kaoru inspected the hall, which was now full of infected people. The principal and teachers had been tied up by the students and brought to the stage. Maki announced that she was going to create a new world for humanity. She now possessed immortality. The infected were going to wash the world with blood, completely overturning the order. Nojiri secretly approached Kaoru and knocked her out with a fire extinguisher. When Kaoru woke up, she was in a storage room. Nojiri told her that she had found a way to suppress her desires. She had been distressed, but through repeated self-torture, she had extinguished her impulses. She advised Kaoru to stay there and wait for everything to end. Otherwise, Kaoru would also be infected. At this time, Maki called and threatened Kaoru to come find her and answer some questions. Then she would consider sparing Kaoru's friends. To save her friends, Kaoru decided to meet with Maki. She arranged for Nojiri to mingle with the infected in search of a working phone to get in touch with the outside world. The summer camp was in chaos. In the power distribution room, there was the body of a female student who had been electrocuted. The ground was strewn with limbs, and the infected were searching everywhere for uninfected students. Fortunately, Hikari realized something was wrong and used some sauce disguised as a nosebleed to escape. As they were discussing whether to go to the meeting, one of the classmates suddenly attacked them. The infected had increased combat power, and more reinforcements arrived shortly after. The two quickly fell into a bitter battle. Luckily, the two on the scene were among the top fighters, and they soon took care of the zombie army. Hikari put an infected classmate into a meat grinder, turning her into minced meat. Shortly after, the distress call of their friend Keiko came from the broadcasting room. Kaoru instructed Hikari to descend the mountain and take refuge in the cottage below, while she set off to rescue Keiko. Along the way, she finally encountered a normal classmate, but it was a pity that this girl had already been stabbed deeply in the back. Chisa and Shinobu appeared, declaring that Kaoru and this girl were the last surviving humans in the camp. Back when they were normal, they despised Kaoru, a good but boring girl. They were just about to kill her when the reporter arrived just in time. It turns out that due to a landslide, he had been forced to climb the mountain on foot, but fortunately, he appeared at the critical moment. The reporter thought that although Kaoru was a minor, she was kind, brave, and intelligent, and most importantly, she was considerate. He then told the sisters that he had brought them a tasty medicine. Chisa scratched the reporter's hand, snatched the syringe, and injected it. The effect of the inhibitor was fast, causing Chisa to become motionless soon. Shinobu, in her anger, rushed forward to avenge her sister, but slipped on the plasma and fell backward. The reporter seized the opportunity to administer the medicine, ending Shinobu's life. After bandaging the wounds, they met Nojiri, who had failed to find a phone to call for help. Kaoru handed some formalin injections to Nojiri, asked her to find Hikari in the mountain cottage, and took the reporter with her to rescue their friend Keiko, whose fate was uncertain. Nojiri ran all the way to the wooden house. The owner of the house was a kind old lady. Unfortunately, Mai had arrived at the cabin before her and cut off the telephone line. The old lady asked the two girls to wait for the phone to be fixed, but the two immediately started fighting. Although Nojiri had always been physically weaker than Mai, she held on to Mai in the struggle, ignoring the pain, and injected her with formalin. After Mai died, Nojiri stuck the last syringe into her abdomen, decisively ending her own life, but not before she urged the old lady to call the police and ask for reinforcements at the camp. Kaoru and the reporter set off to find Maki. Unfortunately, Hikari had been infected at some point and joined the zombie horde. As a swarm of infected approached, the reporter boosted Kaoru onto the beam and got trapped below. At this point, Kaoru unleashed a rain of needles, annihilating all the infected. Just as the last infected lunged at the reporter, Kaoru quickly pulled out a syringe from her metal hairpin and stabbed it in. However, the girl who was infected was her good friend Nami, the one she least wanted to kill. Despite their heartbreak, they had to rally and head off to save Keiko. Eventually, they found Keiko and Maki. Maki threatened them to drop their weapons. Then she said that Kaoru was as excellent as she used to be, so she never planned to really infect Kaoru. Instead, she wanted to test whether Kaoru would choose to become an immortal like her if given the chance. Naturally, Kaoru chose not to. Maki then dropped the knife she was holding to Keiko's head. The reporter rushed forward to untie Keiko, but Maki suddenly lifted Keiko's head and stabbed the knife into the reporter's neck, threatening Kaoru to accept the infection if she wanted to revive the reporter. The reporter took out a recording pen from his bag and played his father's last words to Maki. But it was too late. Maki still hoped that Kaoru would experience the same pain she did. As the reporter was dying, he confessed his feelings to Kaoru. Kaoru agreed to let Maki infect her. However, just as they were getting closer, Kaoru pulled out 2 syringes from her hairpin and stabbed Maki, making her look like she had twin tails. Maki gave a laugh of despair and gradually stopped struggling. The police and medical staff arrived too late. The reporter was saved because the knife had not hit an artery. Despite losing all her friends, Kaoru found love at the last moment. However, the crisis was not over. The scene then shifts to the baby born to the new homeroom teacher. The husband noticed something strange while looking at the baby, only to find dark blood was flowing from the baby's nostrils, indicating that the nightmare was far from over. This is Daniel CC Movie Channel. Stay safe and enjoy your day.